There are some ways, though, to get back in black, some practical advice to get you financially stable again. Scott Bilker is the founder of DebtSmart.com. He joins us from our Union, New Jersey studio to help us out with this one. Good to have you with us, Scott.
Thanks, Gwen. Great to be here.
Tell me, what is the first rule of thumb in cutting down our debt?
Well, first of all, you need to get organized financially, because what happens to a lot of people is they lose track of how much they're spending, and therefore they can't figure out, based on their current income, how much that they can handle and how much more spending they can do.
All right, you heard Jonathan in that story say that his name is Jonathan and he's a debtor, and he's certainly not alone. Once we figure out where our money goes each month, how do we start tightening up our spending?
Okay, well, first of all, it's really not the credit cards themselves, that put you into debt. It really is the spending. So the key is, if you have debts now, you want to stop the spending and get a grip on your current debts by starting to reduce the interest rates, because that's where most of the money is going. It's not going even towards the original debt, it's going to the interest rates. And the average American family is spending about $1,300 a year just in interest.
Wow, that's amazing. Listen, we heard also that one woman who had $20,000 in debt, and she now has $3,000 in savings, so it can be done. Tell us about your company, DebtSmart.com.
Sure. At DebtSmart.com, I provide information to help people save money on their credit cards and debt. And I also like to show people how to do the math, because it's so important to be able to do the math, to be able to tell if you're actually getting some savings. There are ways and strategies you can do by taking advantage of low interest rates and actually reducing the cost of your debt by transferring to those 0% balances. Of course, you have to be careful to make sure that you're disciplined and on time with all your payments, because the one thing to keep in mind throughout all this is that the banks are waiting for you to make any misstep so they can raise your rates.
That really is true. And Scott, you kind of have to read between the lines, too, when you do consolidate. Say you move to one low interest card to put everything into, because sometimes you can get the low interest or even 0% interest rate, and yet, several months down the line, they'll raise it to 18%.
Yeah, you always have to track that. That's why it's important to be debt smart. You have to mark the calendar. You have to take advantage of these low interest rate deals. But if you do that and you do all this work, even if you saved $1,000 and it took you 10 hours, that's $100 an hour. It truly is worth it. But the key here is to be disciplined and start from today with the mindset that every action you're going to take with regard to your debt is to reduce the debt and not create any new spending.
Yeah, is it ever wise, though, to borrow from your retirement to actually pay off your cards?
It depends on your situation, but my rule of thumb is that the best loan is the cheapest loan. So if it makes the most sense to borrow from your 401k, whether it's for a home purchase or to refinance debt, as long as you've done all the math and that is the actual best thing to do, then that would be the course of action I would take. However, it's very important that you pay that back and not just pay off debts and then start spending again.
Right.
That's a mistake people make.
Sure. And Scott, you talked about the average home, too, and how much they're spending.
Yes.
Just because they're doing the minimum payment. The Federal Reserve Board actually says that most Americans with credit cards carry an average balance of about $5,400, which actually would take about 22 years to pay off if you only paid the minimum each month on a card that, say, had 10% interest rate. So what if we could only afford to pay those minimum payments? Because basically it seems like we're sinking and we can't get up to swim.
And that's a very good point, but it's important to at least make that minimum payment, because if you don't, the banks are going to raise your rates because of penalty rates, and those rates can climb into the 30s, and then people will never get out of debt. So definitely want to make those minimum payments. So if you're having trouble doing that, one thing to do is actually reduce the rates, and one thing to reduce the rates is to actually call and negotiate with your banks for lower rates. Banks have saturated the market, and now the only way they can get new customers is really to steal them from other banks. So it's costly for them to acquire new credit customers, so they know when you call and you say, listen, either reduce my rate, waive those fees, or I'm going to use a different card. They take that very seriously.
Sure, and you heard some of those people, they were really desperate in that story. They don't want to spend outside of their means, but the bottom line really is that we kind of live outside of our means, don't we?
Yeah, people do, and I think it's a matter of tracking too, and not following, like that woman who tracked her spending and got her debt down, and that was very good. But the banks aren't innocent in all this. They send offers to everyone saying, go spend, take advantage of this deal, write a check, and go on a vacation. You never get a letter from the bank saying, you know what, you should really cut back your spending and, you know, pay off your debt a little more quickly.
And the sad thing, too, is they're roping our kids in just as they, you know, get off on their own and go off to college. They've got tables set all up for the freshmen. They see them as they're coming, and they're just trying to sign them up for as many cards as they can.
Right, and that's why I think it's important for parents of college-age students, when their kids go to school, to make them a user on their credit card. Of course, there's a risk that if they're not responsible, it could affect you, but I think that the benefits outweigh that, because as a parent, you can help teach your children about sound money management.
Scott Bilker, the founder of DebtSmart.com, some good advice, and we certainly thank you tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you at home, we would like to know what you think. Do you have any advice for our